The morning fog clung to the floor of St. Jude's Chapel like cold steam, wrapping around the dark marble pillars and muffling the quiet sniffling of 40 people dressed in immaculate, impossibly expensive black. Clara stood near the third row from the back, her fingers clutching the velvet strap of her handbag, so hard her knuckles were white. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. On the pristine wooden easel at the front of the altar rested a framed portrait of Julian. Handsome, sharp-jawed, with that infuriating, gentle smirk that usually meant he was about to steal a fry off her plate or kiss her before she could finish a sentence. Beside the portrait sat a sleek, dark mahogany casket buried under a mountain of white orchids. It didn't make any sense. None of it made any sense. 3 days ago, Julian Vance was just Julian. He was the man who lived in a slightly drafty top-floor apartment downtown, who cooked remarkably decent risotto, and who made a living doing consulting work for logistics firms. A job so vague Clara had long stopped asking about it. He had been her boyfriend for 8 quiet, wonderful, and deeply frustrating months. Frustrating because Julian was a ghost. He would vanish for 4 or 5 days at a time without warning, leaving behind only a brief text. Work emergency. Out of touch for a bit. Miss you. He refused to introduce her to his friends. He declined every invite to meet her sister, Sarah. And he strictly forbade her from taking photos of them together, laughingly claiming he had an unphotogenic aura. When she had pushed him on it last week, demanding to know why they could never eat at a normal restaurant on a Friday night without him picking a corner table facing the door, he had kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'm protecting what we have, Clara. Trust me. The world outside this room is complicated." She had planned to break up with him. She had literally sat on her couch on Tuesday evening, drafting a speech about boundaries and self-respect, when an ivory envelope arrived via courier. Inside was an engraved card announcing the memorial service for Julian Vance, loving son and heir to Vance Global Holdings. That was how Clara learned that her secretive, slightly scruffy boyfriend was actually the youngest prince of an international shipping conglomerate worth billions, and that he was dead. A sob choked in Clara's throat as the minister stepped up to the pulpit. The minister cleared his throat, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses. "We are gathered here today to mourn the tragic, untimely passing of Julian Vance." Clara squeezed her eyes shut. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She felt an overwhelming mix of grief, rage, and profound betrayal. He had lied to her every single day. He had built a wall of secrets between them, and now he was lying in a box, forever out of reach of her questions. A slight draft swept through the heavy wooden doors at the back of the sanctuary. The smell of rain and wet asphalt mingled with the cloying scent of lilies. Clara felt an instinctual pull, a prickle at the back of her neck. She turned her head slightly, wiping her eyes with a lace handkerchief, looking back toward the foyer. Standing in the shadow of the heavy oak doors, half hidden by a stone archway, was a tall man in a dark tailored suit. His hair was damp from the drizzle outside. His jaw was set tight, his dark eyes fixated entirely on her. Clara froze. The breath evaporated from her lungs. It was Julian. He wasn't pale or ghost-like or ethereal. He was breathing. His chest rose and fell beneath his coat. He looked exhausted, with dark smudges under his eyes and a fresh, faint red scrape along his left cheekbone, but he was unquestionably, impossibly alive. Clara gasped. A sharp, loud sound that made a wealthy elderly woman in the pew ahead of her shoot a disgusted glance over her shoulder. Clara barely noticed. She stared at Julian, her hands trembling violently. She took a half step out of the pew, her brain short-circuiting. He's alive. He's right there. What is happening? Julian saw her step into the aisle. His eyes widened slightly in sheer panic. He shook his head. A minute, fierce jerk of his chin, and pointed 2 fingers toward the side exit leading to the chapel's courtyard. Then, stepping back into the shadows, he vanished behind the heavy doors. Clara didn't think. She didn't calculate. She simply turned, grabbed her coat, and slipped out the side aisle, ducking past an usher who looked mildly scandalized by her breach of decorum. She burst through the heavy side door into the cold, rainy courtyard. The air tasted clean and sharp after the suffocating smell of lilies. She rounded a stone buttress, her heels clicking loudly on the wet flagstones. A hand shot out from an alcove, wrapping gently but firmly around her wrist, and pulled her back into the alcove's deep shade. Before she could scream, a warm, familiar palm covered her mouth. "Clara, please, don't make a sound," a voice whispered directly into her ear. It was a raspy, low velvet baritone that sent an electric shock straight down her spine. She looked up. He was inches away. She could smell his cologne, sandalwood and cedar, mixed with the faint metallic tang of rain. His eyes were wide, brimming with an intense, terrified urgency she had never seen in him before. He slowly withdrew his hand from her lips, his fingers lingering on her jawline for a fraction of a second before he pulled back, scanning the courtyard anxiously. "You're alive?" Clara whispered, her voice cracking with a mixture of hysterical relief and bubbling anger. You're breathing. Who is in that box, Julian?" "A very expensive mannequin and about 50 pounds of sand," Julian said, his voice flat and tight. He caught her by the shoulders, his grip warm and solid through her coat. "Clara, listen to me. I have about 30 seconds before someone notices I'm missing from the perimeter. You shouldn't be here. Who gave you that invitation?" "It came to my apartment," she hissed, trying to pull away, though part of her wanted to grab his lapels and never let go. "I thought you were dead. I spent 48 hours thinking you were killed in some terrible accident, and then I find out you're a billionaire? Who are you?" Julian looked down at her, his expression softening with a terrible, agonized tenderness. "I'm the man who loves you. That's the only truth that matters. But my family is a den of viperous corporate sociopaths, Clara. My father died 6 months ago, and my older brother, Richard, has been systematically eliminating anyone who stands between him and total control of the company." Clara stared at him, bewildered. "Eliminating? Julian, this isn't a movie. This is—" "A boat explosion off the coast of Maine 2 nights ago," Julian interrupted quietly. "It was meant to look like an engine failure. If I hadn't jumped off the stern 10 seconds before the charge detonated, I would be in that casket for real." Clara felt the cold rain hit her face, but she felt burning hot inside. "Then go to the police." "Richard owns the police. He owns the board. He owns the executors," Julian said grimly. He stepped closer, crowding her against the cold stone wall, his eyes searching hers with desperation. "I had to let them think the hit succeeded. It's the only way I can gather the evidence to bring Richard down without him putting a target on my back again. But if he discovers I survived, if he finds out I have a soft spot, a weakness, someone I care about—" He swallowed hard, his thumb lightly brushing a tear off her cheek. The gesture was so tender, so impossibly him, that Clara's heart did a sickening flip. "If they know I'm alive," Julian whispered, his voice trembling slightly, "they'll kill you to get to me, or worse, use you to draw me out." The air between them hung heavy, filled with the sound of rain falling on the stone courtyard and the faint sound of the funeral organ playing inside the chapel. "So what am I supposed to do?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible. "Go back in there? Pretend to mourn a man who is standing right in front of me?" "Yes," Julian said softly. "Go back in. Cry. Be heartbroken. Go home. Tell everyone I'm dead. Forget you ever saw me today. I need you to be invisible, Clara, for your safety and for mine." "I can't just forget you," she said, anger flaring through her fear. "You lied to me for 8 months. I lied to keep you clean of this filth," he snapped softly, his eyes flashing with raw emotion. "And I'm telling you the truth now because I love you too much to see you put in a real box. Please, Clara, trust me one last time." Footsteps crunched on the gravel at the far end of the courtyard. Someone was approaching. Julian's eyes darted toward the sound. He looked back at Clara, a flash of pure sorrow crossing his face. Before she could speak, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. It wasn't a soft, gentle kiss. It was desperate, possessive, and electric, tasting of rain and quiet desperation. It pulled the air right out of her lungs, reminding her instantly of why she had fallen for him in the first place. The hidden depths, the intense focus, the way he made the rest of the world blur into insignificance. He pulled back, breathless. "Go!" he rasped. "Now!" He turned and slipped into the shadows behind a dense hedgerow, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. Clara stood alone in the rain, her lips tingling, her brain spinning. She forced her hands to stop shaking, wiped her face, and walked back toward the side door of the chapel. The wake was held at the Vance estate, a sprawling, imposing limestone mansion overlooking the misty cliffs of the coastline. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress built by someone who thoroughly distrusted the rest of humanity. Clara hadn't planned on going. She had wanted to go home, wrap herself in a blanket and cry, or throw plates. But as she sat in her tiny Honda outside the chapel, her sister Sarah had called her. "Clara, where are you?" Sarah had demanded over the phone. Sarah worked as a freelance event photographer and had somehow snagged a last-minute gig covering the High Society memorial reception. "I'm at the Vance estate. Clara, this place is insane. There are security guards with earpieces everywhere. And guess what? The family is offering a press statement. If your boyfriend really was that Julian Vance, you need to be here to see this." So Clara had driven to the estate, not to investigate, but because sitting in her quiet apartment knowing Julian was out there somewhere, playing dead while his murderous brother toasted his memory, felt entirely unbearable. The grand reception hall was filled with soft orchestral music, waiters carrying trays of expensive champagne, and women in sleek black dresses talking in low, calculated tones. Clara stood near a tall marble pillar, nursing a glass of sparkling water she had no intention of drinking. Her eyes scanned the room nervously. Every time a door opened, her heart leapt, half expecting Julian to walk in, half terrified that Richard Vance would notice her. She spotted Richard across the room. He was older than Julian by about 4 years, with cold, hawkish eyes and a perfectly manicured posture that practically screamed arrogance. He was holding a glass of scotch, chatting casually with an older man in a tailored suit, looking entirely unbothered by his brother's tragic demise. "He doesn't look very heartbroken, does he?" Clara jumped, almost spilling her water. She turned to find a young man standing beside her. He looked to be in his late 20s, with messy dark hair, sharp blue eyes, and an impish, slightly disheveled charm. He wore a tuxedo, but his bow tie was untied and draped loosely around his neck. "I'm sorry," Clara said guardedly. "Richard," the young man said, tilting his glass toward the older Vance brother. "He looks about as sad as a wolf that just inherited the sheepfold. I'm Gabriel, by the way, family black sheep, distant cousin, and professional nuisance." Clara blinked, taking a small step back. "Clara." "Ah, Clara," Gabriel said, eyeing her with acute curiosity. "You don't look like the usual vultures circling the estate. You look like you actually knew him, really knew him." Clara's heart did a nervous flutter. I did. We worked together, briefly." "Right? Consulting," Gabriel said with a dry chuckle. Julian was terrible at keeping his stories straight when he was trying to hide. He always used consulting as a cover. He thought he was brilliant at playing a normal guy. Gabriel's smile faded slightly, replaced by a softer, genuine glint of sadness. "I'm going to miss him. He was the only one in this cursed family who actually had a spine." Clara looked down at her glass, feeling a wave of grief crash over her again. The tragic reality was that everyone in this room believed Julian was gone. She was carrying a secret that felt heavier than the mountain above them. "Excuse me," a sharp, icy voice interrupted. Clara looked up, Richard Vance was standing a few feet away, his cold eyes locked onto her. Beside him stood a burly man in a sharp black suit. Head of security, undoubtedly. Gabriel, Richard said coldly. Who is your friend? Just expressing my condolences to a colleague of Julian's. Richard, Gabriel replied smoothly, though Clara noticed his shoulder muscles tighten slightly. This is Clara. Richard walked over, his eyes scanning Clara from head to toe with the cold efficiency of a lone officer evaluating a bad risk. Clara, I don't recall seeing your name on the family guest list. She was a friend, Gabriel chimed in quickly. I didn't ask you, Gabriel, Richard snapped, not taking his eyes off Clara. Julian was very private about his acquaintances. It's unusual for someone from outside our corporate circle to receive a formal invitation to a private family service. How did you get in? Clara felt a bead of sweat trace down her back. Julian didn't send the invitation. She suddenly realized with a jolt of horror. If Julian was hiding, he wouldn't have sent an invitation to my apartment. It came in the mail, Clara said, forcing her voice to remain steady, though her hands were cold. I assumed his assistant sent it. Richard stepped closer, his presence suffocating. Julian didn't have an assistant for his private affairs, which means someone else put your name on that list. Someone who knew about you. He leaned down slightly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You see, Clara, my brother was keeping a lot of secrets lately. He was moving money. He was meeting people off the grid. And I'm very curious to know if he left anything behind. A file? A flash drive? A word of advice? Clara backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. I don't know what you're talking about. We just dated. I thought he was an accountant. Richard smiled, a cold, empty expression that didn't reach his eyes. Of course you did. Thomas. He called softly to his security guard. Please escort Miss. Hey, watch where you're going. A loud voice shouted near the grand staircase. Everyone turned. A waiter carrying a silver tray full of red wine glasses had collided headfirst with a newly arrived guest. The waiter stumbled, sending 4 glasses of Cabernet crashing onto the polished white marble floor, splashing red liquid all over the guest's expensive pants and shoes. I am so sorry, sir. I am so sorry. The waiter gasped frantically, dropping to his knees to pick up the shattered glass. The guest coughed, brushing frantically at his soaked trousers. It's fine, it's fine. Just fetch a towel. The room dissolved into brief chaos. Guests gasped and shifted away from the mess, and Richard's head snapped toward the commotion. His attention momentarily pulled away from Clara. In the confusion, Clara felt a firm hand catch her elbow. She gasped, turning, expecting Thomas the guard. Instead, a man in a waiter's vest and a dark apron stood beside her, holding a velvet-lined tray. He kept his head bowed, but as he leaned down, pretend wiping a smudge off the marble pillar near her head, he looked up through a fringe of dark hair. It was Julian. Clara caught her breath, her eyes widening. Julian's eyes flickered with absolute warning. Don't look at me, he murmured under his breath, his lips barely moving as he wiped the pillar with a white cloth. Walk to the terrace. Now, go through the French doors. Before Richard could turn back around, Julian straightened up, bowed his head politely, and melted effortlessly into the crowd of uniformed catering staff moving toward the kitchen. Clara didn't hesitate. While Richard was busy sternly reprimanding the catering manager for the wine spill, Clara slipped through the crowd, pushed open the glass French doors, and stepped out onto the breezy, moonlit terrace. The air outside was brisk, carrying the salt spray scent of the ocean crashing against the cliffs far below. The terrace was surrounded by stone balustrades and lined with potted topiary trees. Clara walked quickly toward the far edge of the patio, her mind racing. He was here, in the house, dressed as a waiter. Was he completely insane? A door near the service pantry squeaked open, and Julian slipped out onto the stone patio, closing the door quietly behind him. He stripped off the waiter's apron, tossing it onto a patio chair, and walked quickly toward her, his face a mask of furious anxiety. "Are you out of your mind?" Clara hissed, turning on him the moment he was within arm's reach. "You told me to go home. You told me to pretend you were dead, and then you sneak into your own murder wake dressed as a caterer?" "I had to," Julian said, grabbing her hands. His hands were warm, firm, and grounding. "I found out an hour ago that Richard sent those invitations out himself. He cross-referenced my private burner phone records from before the boat explosion. He knows I was seeing someone, Clara. He sent you that invitation to see if you would show up, to test if you knew anything." Clara's breath hitched. He was threatening me just now. He asked if you gave me a file or a flash drive." Julian cursed under his breath, stepping closer and cupping her face in his hands. "Look at me. Did you bring anything with you? Did I ever leave anything at your apartment that seemed out of place?" "No. You left a half-eaten tub of ice cream and a pair of socks," Clara said, her voice rising in panicked frustration. "Julian, he has security guards. He has a man named Thomas who looks like he breaks bricks with his forehead. You need to leave." "Not without the drive," Julian said fiercely. "Before the boat went down, I hid a hard drive in my father's old study on the second floor. It has the encrypted ledger showing Richard's embezzlement and the payments he made to the maritime sabotage crew. If I get that drive, I can go to the federal prosecutors tonight. If I don't, Richard clears the accounts by tomorrow morning and vanishes to a non-extradition country, leaving me framed for the entire collapse of the company." Clara stared at him, the reality of the situation washing over her in terrifying waves. He wasn't just hiding. He was fighting for his life, his name, and his freedom. And despite all the lies, despite the 8 months of secrecy, as she looked into his dark, terrified eyes, she realized something terrible. She was still hopelessly in love with him. "The second floor is locked down," Clara whispered. "I saw 2 guards near the main staircase." "I know," Julian said, a grim smirk playing on his lips, "which is why I need a distraction." "No, absolutely not. I am a graphic designer, Julian, not a spy." "Clara, please," he urged, his thumb gently stroking her cheekbone, sending a shiver through her despite the cold wind. "Just give me 3 minutes. Make a scene. Spill a drink. Pretend to faint. Anything to pull Thomas away from the foot of the stairs." Clara looked at him, her heart thumping against her ribs. "If we pull this off, you owe me a massive explanation. And a real date, at a restaurant with windows." Julian let out a soft, genuine laugh, the tension in his shoulders breaking for a split second. "Deal. On my life." He leaned down and kissed her swiftly, a sweet, urgent promise, before stepping back into the shadows near the ivy-covered wall, preparing to scale the trellis to the second-floor balcony. Clara took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, and turned back toward the French doors. She walked back into the warm, noisy room. Richard was standing near the bar, speaking in hush-toned hushes to Thomas, the head of security. Clara took a glass of champagne from a passing tray. She took a big gulp to settle her nerves, wiped her hands, and began walking directly toward Richard. Make a scene, she thought. Right, I can do drama. As she neared the bar, Gabriel stepped out from behind a floral arrangement, almost bumping into her. "Whoa, easy there, Clara," Gabriel said with a light smile, holding up his hands. "You look like a woman on a mission." Clara's brain swirled with panic, adrenaline, and nerves. She looked at Gabriel, then looked past him at Richard, who was starting to turn around. She needed to pull attention away from the stairs immediately. "I need you to help me, Arthur," Clara blurted out loudly. Gabriel froze. He blinked, a look of profound confusion crossing his face. "Arthur? Who the hell is Arthur?" Clara's face went hot. Arthur was her ex-boyfriend from 3 years ago, a man she had accidentally called upon whenever she was severely stressed. I mean Gabriel," Clara stammered quickly, her face burning bright red as a few surrounding guests turned to look at them. I meant Gabriel. I am so sorry. Gabriel stared at her for a second, then burst into a rich, booming laugh that echoed across the quiet marble room. Arthur? Really? Ouch, Clara. I know I'm just a distant cousin, but being called by the ex's name at a funeral reception is a new low for my self-esteem. The moment was so absurd, so profoundly awkward, that several nearby high society guests chuckled into their wine glasses. Even Thomas, the security guard, turned his head, amused by the awkward scene unfolding near the bar. I'm so sorry, Clara muttered, genuinely embarrassed, though secretly thrilled that the sudden burst of laughter had successfully drawn everyone's eyes, including Thomas's, away from the back hallway leading upstairs. It's fine, Gabriel grinned, winking at her. Just don't call me Arthur when the lawyers get here. Clara used the moment of distraction to step away, casting a quick glance toward the dark balcony above. She saw a shadow slip through the French doors of the second-floor study. Julian was inside. Now she just had to buy him enough time to get out. Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you found this story interesting, please consider giving this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And if you want to hear plenty more stories just like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There's a lot more to unpack in future videos. See you soon.